Hey, before we get to the actual video, there are a bunch of topics in this video that really should have been split apart into 6 different videos. But because they're all related by an OR logical test, just different ways to do it, I put them all in one video. So be sure and click below the video and open the Show More Time hyperlink table of contents if you want to jump to any particular topic. Welcome to Excel magic trick number 1375. Hey, if you want to download this Excel workbook, Excel magic trick 1375 start or the finished file so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we have a great video here. We want to see how to sum with an OR logical test based on 2 different columns in 2 different tables. And we're going to see 6 amazing examples. Here they are. Now, this is going to be quite an epic video because some of these are going to be quite advanced topics. Now, the first one is not going to be adding. We'll see how to conditionally format the row in the data set based on OR criteria. Then with a helper column to aid our formula, we'll see SUMIFS and DSUM. Then we'll see an array formula with no helper column. And then we'll see a Power Query solution and a DAX formula to solve this problem. Now, our OR logical test will have OR criteria. And what that means is we're going to look through this data set. And for the adding, we need to pick out just the sales where the product is quad or the color is blue. Now, for an OR logical test, we can find a record where the product is quad, but the color is not blue. That means true, false. That would be a record we want to highlight or use the sales number to add. We could also find a product with the color blue. That's not a quad. That would be a true, false. Or we could find a quad product that is blue. That would be true, true. So an OR logical test needs 1 or more trues in order for the number to be included in our calculation or the row to be formatted. Now, here's the fundamental problem with the task in this video. We definitely have a product column in our data set. So we can clearly see this is quad, true. This is not quad, false, false, true. But what are we going to do for color? We definitely need to somehow indicate for each record whether the product is blue or not. Now, for the helper column solutions, we'll add a column here. We'll just look up the product key and return the color. In essence, adding all of the proper colors, and then we'll run our OR logical test. But for the conditional formatting, array, and even Power Query and DAX, we're not going to need to add that helper column. Now, actually, the Power Query will temporarily add a helper column. All right, now we're going to start with a conditional formatting example. For conditional formatting, we simply highlight the data set, go to Home, Conditional Formatting, and look for a built-in feature. But there isn't a built-in feature to highlight the whole row. So we'll use New Rule and build a logical true-false formula, where each cell will have a formula that determines true or false. It should get the formatting. Now, anytime you use a logical formula like this, I'm going to take the same size range off to the side, build my formula, copy it over and down, and see if the patterns of trues and falses work in the cells. Now, when we use a logical formula, we're in the cells, right? So I'll create a formula right there, copy it over and down so it'll be in every single cell. So when we start our formula right here, we actually have to build it from the point of view of the top left cell in the data set, because the conditional formatting will actually copy that exact formula in a dialog box behind the scenes in memory, and it will be as if there's a formula in every cell. Now, the first thing is I'm going to try and work on the color blue, and then retrieve for each cell over here the actual correct color for the particular record. I'm going to type equal, and I'm going to use VLOOKUP. Now the lookup value for each record, I'm always going to need to look at the product key. That's the unique identifier that picks out for the duplicate products whether it is a particular color. Now that cell reference needs to be locked as I go across the row because every row needs to look up the product key. But when I copy it down, it needs to move to the next product key for each record. So I hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Lock the column, but not the row. Comma. The table, I'm going to highlight the first 3 columns here. First column has our unique identifier. Third column has color. I need to lock it, so I hit the F4 key, comma, column index number. Third column has the color we want to get, so I'm simply going to type a 3, comma. We're doing exact match because that first column of the lookup table is not sorted. You can put false or 0. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Copy it over and down. Now that's not quite what I want. Now notice I have the active cell highlighted at the top, so I hit F2 to edit this formula. And then I simply ask, is the result of VLOOKUP equal to whatever criteria we type over in cell K21? I'm going to hit F4 to lock that in all directions. Now the edited formula, I want to populate it throughout all the cells, so I hold Control and Enter. Now notice the patterns and trues and falses are working for the color. The entire 4th row has trues because that particular quad with that product ID, boom, is blue. Now I'm going to hit F2 in the active cell. That's only the first question, and we have 2. Using an OR logical test, so I use the OR function. It contains 1, 2 tests. Both come out true or false, or will deliver a true when either one or both evaluate to true. Now our first, or in our case second logical test is going to be same first record, but I'm going to click the product name, and I'm going to hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. Column, but not the row locked. I'm going to ask the question, are you equal to whatever criteria I type over here into J21, F4 to lock it in all directions, comma. And there's our 2 logical tests. I come to the end very carefully, close parentheses. To populate it through the range, I hold Control and Enter. And look at that. Now we have a true for that first record and for the 4th one. And then down here, I see the 7th row. I come down here, and sure enough, the beginner kite. Down here, we can see this is blue. Now I'm going to copy the formula from the upper left corner, F2. And in edit mode, I'm going to highlight the entire thing. That formula is built from the point of view of that cell right there. So Control-C, Escape, highlight, making sure that the upper left corner is the active cell. Home, Conditional Formatting, New Rule, or I can use the keyboard Alt-HL-N. I want to use a formula to determine which cells to format it, so I click it or hit Page Down. I want to format values where that formula is true, so I click with my I-beam or hit Tab. Control-V to paste that formula, and you can pick whichever formatting you want from any one of the tabs. Fill yellow. Click OK, click OK. That is pretty amazing. If I change this to sunset, enter, instantly it updates. Notice the sunset, we only have sunset red, but because it's OR, sunset is tagged. That quad, and that beginner kite are all blue. Now I'm going to Control-Z and leave it right there. All right, that's our first example. Let's go over to the sheet Sum Helper. All right, so now we are going to simply add an extra column and then do our formula to add based on an OR logical test. So we're simply going to use equals VLOOKUP. Notice it's the same formula we used for our conditional formatting. That is a relative cell reference, comma. The table, I'm going to highlight the first 3 columns, F4 to lock it, comma, 3, comma, 0 for exact match, close parentheses. Control-Enter. Double-click and send it down. So now this is straightforward. We have a single data set, product, and color. Now notice we have two conditions. I'm just going to run two SUMIFS. Now let's look at SUMIFS. We cannot put all of the criteria in SUMIFS, even though if I look ahead, criteria range 1, criteria 1, criteria range 2, criteria 2, because that's an AND logical test. So no problem. I'm going to use two different SUMIFS in the same formula and add them. Sum range, that's going to be our sales. We're not copying this anywhere, so we do not need to worry about cell references. Comma, criteria range, I'm going to look through the product column. Comma, criteria 1, I say, please find all the quads. Close parentheses. SUMIFS will simply find quads, take the number. Not a quad, not using that number, and so on. Now I simply add and use another SUMIFS. Sum range, same range, but now, comma, I need to pick out from the color column, comma, all of the blues. Now, close parentheses. There will be a problem, but let's just Control-Enter. That's too much. And the reason why is because the first sums adds the quad. And if we look at the fourth record, so it found a quad and added that number. But guess what? The second SUMIFS, it was looking for blue, and it found a blue and added the number twice. Now, no problem. We can, since this SUMIF and this SUMIF both have the same number, we can simply subtract from it and use SUMIFS with two conditions. So it will then subtract this record because there's quad and blue. So in essence, we're subtracting to avoid the double count. SUMIFS. Sum range, I'm going to highlight that right there. Comma, criteria range. I'm going to move the screen tip over here. Product column. Comma, criteria, quad. Comma, criteria 2, helper column with color. Comma, criteria 2. And that will do it. Now, some of you are saying, well, I know how to do this with SUMPRODUCT and use the plus symbol and then say greater than 0. That formula will work too, but this one calculates a lot faster. And actually, we'll see the logic that we would use inside of SUMPRODUCT to do this kind of avoid double counting or criteria formula actually in our array formula solution. But when I hit Enter, there it is. If you didn't believe it, we could test it on a small data set. I'm going to click on the first one, hold Control, click on non-contiguous cells or cells not next to each other. Now that I have them highlighted, I come down here, and there in the status bar is the sum. All right, so there's three SUMIFS. Single condition plus single condition minus both conditions together. That will do it. Now, we can use the DSUM. And the DSUM actually is going to be quite a bit easier, but you do have to know how to set up OR criteria on two different columns. Now, in order to use the DSUM function, you have to have exactly the field names listed, and then below you have to list the criteria. These field names inside the DSUM function will communicate with a proper data set that has field names up at the top. If you do not have the same field names at the top and your criteria area, you cannot use DSUM. DSUM also has the limitation that you can't ever copy the formula, whereas something like this SUMIFS you would be able to copy. Now, we're looking for exactly quad, so I would like to put an equal sign in QUAD, which is what's required for D functions to find exactly quad. If I hit Enter, guess what? I get a name error because there's no such thing as a quad function or a defined name or table name. But no problem. I'm simply putting an apostrophe before the equal sign, and then when I hit Enter, it puts it in as text, which is exactly what all of the D functions and advanced filter needs for exact criteria. Now, because it's OR, I have to go down to the next row for OR criteria. Now, the first row says find quad or whatever else if I leave it empty, or, and I'm going to leave this one empty, which is whatever product there might be, and then apostrophe equal sign blue and enter. Now watch this. Equals DSUM. And you can see there's standard deviation of the population, DSUM. There's DAverage, DGet, a bunch of D functions. Database, you have to have proper field names in the first row, records in row, proper data set, comma. That's the field we want to make the sum calculation on. Now for field, I can count on my fingers 1, 2, 3. So I could put a 3. Or in double quotes, I could put sales. Or I could have the field name off to the side and click on it. I'm going to hard code it in, sales, and that indicates which column the sum function should be performing on. Comma, criteria. Again, you have to have the field names listed with exactly as they are in the data set, and or criteria listed on different rows. Close parentheses and enter. And now if we come up and I type sunset and enter, that formula works. We can see our conditional formatting is working. And then I can come down here and change this one. And there we go. Two formulas. SUMIFS, DSUM with OR criteria setup for adding when we have a helper column. Now we want to go over to the sheet SUM with no helper column. And actually, this is the most interesting of all of the solutions here. Now, if we're going to build a formula here to run an OR logical test on 2 columns, well, we only have one of the columns here. So we're going to, in our formula down here, have to simulate that helper column with the colors that we created in our last example. Now, I'm going to start off by coming to the first column of this lookup table and sorting it smallest to biggest. So I'm going to click in this proper data set, field names at the top, records and rows, and empty cells all the way around. Right-click sort, A to Z. Now, I did that because down here, if I'm going to create that helper column, I would like to use approximate match lookup. And approximate match lookup, regardless if you have numbers or text, can be done if the first column is sorted from smallest to biggest. Now, think about how we created the helper column here. We had to look up the product key for each row. So I had to look up all of these and then return the color. So watch this. And I'm not going to use VLOOKUP. I'm going to use the original lookup function, lookup. Now, lookup only does approximate match. That's why I sorted that first column. But watch this. And we're actually going to use the second option here. We have a lookup value and then our table similar to what we would have in VLOOKUP. But lookup value argument in lookup can do a function argument array operation. And what does that mean? I can give that first lookup value argument every single lookup value simultaneously, then type a comma, give it the table, just like we did in our last 2 examples. And lookup will know to go and look up every single one of these and return every single color. Now, how does lookup know to look up color? Well, lookup actually can do vertical or horizontal lookup. Because we have more rows than columns, it's going to do vertical lookup. And the lookup function always takes the item from the last column. So that's it. Close parentheses. And when I F9, you've got to be kidding me. That is exactly the helper column we created in the last 2 examples. But we created it inside the cell. I'm going to Control Z. That actually is what I want to do. And I'm going to click Escape. And you can do it that way if you want. But I'm going to resort this by using Control Z. That was the original order. Now remember, lookup can't do exact match. And if this isn't sorted, we have to do exact match. Well, let's just try VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP could do exact or approximate. Lookup value, I'm going to try that same trick. All the product keys, comma, the table, same exact table, comma. But this time, lookup requires that we say, hey, go get the color from the third column, comma, exact match, either false or 0, close parentheses. And when I hit F9, it will not work. Control Z. Now, I actually wrote a book called Control-Shift-Enter, Mastering Excel Array Formulas. And I detail all sorts of things in that book, including a few of the functions in Excel that have arguments like VLOOKUP, lookup value, that can't do a function argument array operation. Function argument array operation just means I would like to give that argument an array of values and tell VLOOKUP to spit out an array of answers. But yeah, it won't do it. Well, guess what? There actually is a way we can amend this range that represents an array of items to force VLOOKUP to do a function argument array operation, which in turn will force VLOOKUP to spit out all of the answers. And if we can do that, then we can use the exact match of VLOOKUP. Now, we're going to do something really strange here, and I have a bunch of videos here that have a discussion of how this formula element came about and why it might work. Because there really isn't an exact dictionary from Microsoft that says how all these strange formula elements work. Well, OK, we're going to use the T function. So T, that's because our lookup values are text. If they were numbers, we would use the N function. And then in value, I'm going to say if. And then I'm going to put in curly brackets the number 1 in the logical test right there. That's an array constant with a single 1. And the 1 represents true. And the array syntax, which is the curly brackets, will help force VLOOKUP to understand it as an array. Then in value of true, we simply put the range of values that we would like VLOOKUP to recognize. And then I close parentheses, not putting anything into value of false, and then close parentheses on the T. And there you go. That little bit will force VLOOKUP to do a function argument array operation. I put my cursor at the end, F9. That is amazing. Esoteric, yes, but amazing. Control Z. Now, since I have my helper column, one of the logical tests we need to say, hey, are any of you equal to blue? I'm going to hit F9 to evaluate it. There's some trues and falses that indicate which records have the color blue. Control Z. Now, I'm going to put parentheses around that operation right there, because I need to force the equal sign to calculate before the addition that I'm going to do right here. Addition oftentimes represents an OR logical test. And what we're going to get is we're going to put our second condition in parentheses here. So open parentheses, highlight the entire product column. Are any of you equal to quad? Close parentheses. Now, we used a plus here, and I'm going to highlight the second part, F9. Notice there's going to be trues and falses in the second part and trues and falses in the first part. If we have a true in the first part, that means we found the color blue. If we have a true in the second part, that means we found a quad. True plus true, because we have a math operation, the logical values will be converted to numbers, and true plus true will become 2. Now I'm going to Control Z, highlight the entire thing, F9, and there's our array of numbers. Now notice this explicitly shows us the records that have a double count. So to convert this to an array that we can multiply times our sales to pick out the right numbers, we need to get rid of the 2's, because 2, which is the fourth record, times that fourth sales amount, of course, wouldn't work at all. So Control Z, now we simply say that whole array of numbers, are any of you greater than 0? Now, we don't have to put parentheses around that, because in the order of operations in Excel, math operators like plus come before comparative operators. My cursor's at the end. I hit F9, and there's my series of trues and falses. Now, I need to convert these trues and falses to ones and zeros because I want to use that array inside of SUMPRODUCT, and SUMPRODUCT does not understand trues and falses. Control Z. So now I'm going to have to add parentheses around this to force the comparative operator to calculate before my double negative. Now, that's the construction I mentioned earlier in the video that sometimes people use for an OR logical test when there's a risk of double counting. Now, if my cursor's at the end and I hit F9, there is an array of ones and zeros, one number for each row in our transaction table. I can multiply these times the sales number, and boom, I get my answer. Control Z. Now I'm going to come right after the equal sign, type SUMPRODUCT. SUMPRODUCT is perfect for taking an array of a certain dimension, comma, and multiplying it by a second array that is exactly the same dimension. And our dimension is 1 column by 18 rows. Now I close parentheses, and when I hit enter, there is the formula to add running an OR logical test when our criteria are coming from different columns in different tables. All right, enter. All right, so there's 4 examples so far. Let's go over to the sheet Sum Power Query DAX. PQ for Power Query, DAX for the DAX function language inside of Power Pivot. Now, both Power Query and Power Pivot using DAX require that you have the right version. For Power Query, I have Excel 2016, so I go to Data, and there it is. Get and Transform is Power Query. If you have Excel 2010 or 13, you have to download Power Query as an extra tab. Now, Power Pivot. I have Excel 2016, but you have to have the right version. Here are the correct versions for Excel 2016. You can have the standalone, the disk with Office 2016 Professional, or the one you really should get, Office 365 Pro Plus. Now, here is the secret hint about Power Pivot and DAX. If, and I'm going to delete this, if you just have any version of Excel 2016, you actually have Power Pivot built in. You just don't have the Power Pivot ribbon tab. And so I'm going to show you the trick for building DAX formulas, building relationships between tables both ways, whether you have the proper version or you just have Excel 2016. All right, so we're going to start with Power Query. Now, we have to import this table and this table, merge them with a join between these 2 columns to create a single table that will have the product and color we need. Then we're going to import these and use these as conditions or criteria or parameters in the Power Query editor. All right, I'm going to click in a single cell. I need to import this. So I go to Data, Get and Transform, and there it is. I have already converted this to an Excel table and named it. So I simply click From Table. Now, there's the name that imported from the actual table in the Excel sheet. And that's a perfectly good name for our query that we're going to use for our merge and for the table we will import into the Power Pivot data model. It already has 2 steps. Those are fine. The columns we're going to need are product, product key, sales, and date. I'm using the Control key as I select each one of those. Now I want to right-click any of them and point to Remove Other Columns. Now I want to close and load, but I want to click the little drop-down because I want the second option, Close and Load to. I only want a connection because I'm going to need to import them into Power Query and then manipulate these tables to get what I want. And when I use only create a connection, it will import it as a query, but I am also going to check this because I know the next solution I'm going to need it in the data model. Now I click Load. The Workbook Query task pane opens. I can see I have the table. Now I'm going to click in this table, Data, from table, or I'm going to use the keyboard Alt-APT. D product is fine. These steps are fine. The columns I'm going to need are color all the way to product key. So now I'm holding Shift and click to select them all. Right click, remove other columns. Now close and load to. Only a connection. I need this one in the data model too. Click load. That's kind of cool. These are available for Power Query, but they're also already in the data model. Now we're going to need this little table too. This is sometimes called a parameter table. Click in a single cell, Alt-APT. There's the name. There's the steps. I want both of these. And remember, these have columns, but only one record in each, one item in each. Close and load to. Only a connection. I also need this in the data model. Click load. All right, so now before I merge these two tables in Power Query, I actually want to copy this and convert it to a single item. So I'm going to right-click, duplicate. Now I definitely want to change the name on this. This one is going to be our condition or criteria for product. So I'm simply going to call it product. Enter. I do not need this step, so I click the red X to get rid of it. Now I want to come up to the f of x and add a step in our Power Query. Notice it says equal source. That actually says equal the step before. And now I want to extract the first item in the product column. So in square brackets, I have to type the name of the column, close square brackets. Then Power Query uses base 0. So for any list, it doesn't start at 1, 2, 3, 4. It starts at 0, 1, 2. So the first item is always referred to as 0. And I want to get the first item in this column. And you have to put it in curly brackets. That's list syntax. 0 and curly bracket. Over in Excel, of course, that means an array. Over here in Power Query, that means a list. Now when I hit Enter, watch what happens. It not only got rid of the table, it converts it to a single item. Actually, you can see up here it says text. It's a single text item. Now I'm going to home, and guess what? I can just click Close and Load because it automatically will load it as a connection only. Let's do it a second time. Right-click, duplicate. This one's going to be called color. Enter. Get rid of the second step with that red X. Click the f of x. Come to the end. In square brackets, the field name, close square bracket. List syntax, base 0. That means the first one. And list syntax. Enter. There's our single text item, home, close, and load. Now, I want to merge these two and convert them and reference these variables over here. So now we go up to Data, New Query, Combine Queries, and Merge. Merge is sort of like a relationship in Power Pivot Data Model, or sort of like VLOOKUP, or sort of like joins in SQL. I'm going to select the first table and select Product Key. Remember, this is the sales table where there's lots of duplicates. But this is referring to, over in our lookup table, our column with a unique identifier or a primary key. This is the foreign key. This is the primary key. Now there's going to be a relationship between these. And it's actually a join here in Power Query. This is a left outer join, which means it'll take all the records from here and any matching ones from the second. Now, really what it will do is it'll add an extra column with all of these columns available to expand and show as part of the record up in this table. So when I click OK, here's the new column with our table. You can actually click in each cell and see there it brought the record from the lookup table because it matched that foreign key with this primary key. And each one of these has the same thing. We want to click the expand, and we're going to uncheck everything because the only thing we want is color. Now think about this. Earlier in the video, we had to create a helper column to get color using VLOOKUP. But here we're using join to do it. Now I definitely want to uncheck Use Original Column as Prefix. Click OK. Now we have our color and our product, and we can run an OR logical test on 2 columns. Now, we're going to add an extra column to run that logical test. So I'm going to go to Add Column, Custom Column. We're going to call this OR Test. Click down here. And over in Excel, we would use the OR function and have 2 logical tests. But over here in Power Query, it's going to be a lot different. It'll have the same end result. We're going to run 2 logical tests. Anytime at least one of them comes out true, we'll get a true for the record. The function we're going to use is List.AnyTrue. Now, I had to make sure and have the capitals and lower cases in the right place. Notice any means or. Any one of them can be true. If we needed to run an AND logical test, that would have to say all. Now, I can already see I didn't spell it right. So ST, delete, delete. All right, you ready? Open parentheses. Now, if that wasn't hard enough, inside here, we still want to run those logical tests like we would in Excel, but we have to put it in list syntax. So open curly bracket. Now, I can double-click the product, and I have to ask the question, are you equal to, in double quotes, quad, end double quotes. Now, that's only temporary. We will replace that in our M code later with our variable that comes from that parameter table over in Excel. Now I type a comma. The second logical test will be color. Are you equal to, in double quotes, blue, and double quotes. Now we have to close the list syntax, close parentheses, and that is our OR logical test formula. When I click OK, there it is. That true came because there was a true here and a false here, at least one. Down here, this one came because that's true and that is true also. So at least one true, we got a true. Down here, we got false. That's not equal to quad, but here we got a true. Now, I'm going to filter this column for only the true. So I unselect all, select true, click OK. There's the actual numbers we need to aggregate. I do not need any of the other columns except for this one. So right-click, remove other columns. Now I'm going to go over to Transform, Number column, over to the Statistics dropdown, and Sum. And check that out. There is a single number we can dump back into the cell. Now, I want to make sure and name this. So I'm going to call this total and enter. Now, we're going to go to Home, Close and Load to. I'm going to dump it as a table on this existing sheet. Click the Collapse button. I'm going to try and put it into M21, click OK. Now we click Load, and just like that, there is our number. I'm going to click in the cell Control-1 to add some currency number format. Click OK. Scroll over to the side. And now let's test this. Let's come over here, Sunset. And when I hit Enter, there's definitely one downside of Power Query. It doesn't update until we right-click, refresh. What? It's not updating? Yes, that's true because although we changed it here, we never connected the query to these 2 parameters. So we're going to come over to the total query, right-click, edit. Now we're going to manually go up into the code. So we go to View, Advanced Editor. And we want to notice that over here in our workbook queries, we're allowed to refer to product and color. Remember, those are just single items. So we're going to come to the top of the M code. It says let. There's the code. Each step is named. If there's no spaces, it's simply the text, equal sign, and then the function. If there are spaces, then it has to have double quotes. But to differentiate it from actual text that's in double quotes, there's a pound sign at the beginning. That means that's the name of the step. Now notice each one of these steps, comma, 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 all the way to the end. The last step does not have a comma because then it says in, and then there's the name of the last step. That will be the output. So we're going to come to the top after let, enter, tab. Now I'm going to name a variable that I'm going to use down here for product and here for color. So right there I'm going to type product criteria space equal sign space. And now I can refer to our query result from over here, product. Enter, tab, color criteria space equal sign space and color. That's referring to the output from one of our queries. Now I'm a bad typer, so I'm going to come up here and double click. I see there's a space at the end, so I'm going to hold shift and backspace, control C. That's the variable we're going to use down here instead of quad. Click shift and arrow, control V. Now I'm going to come up, double click, shift backspace, control C. Click at the end of blue, shift arrow, control V. And there are our two variables being used for the step where we do an OR logical test. I'm going to click done. And notice it says token comma expected. And one thing about Power Query and also Power Pivot and DAX is it seems to me that the error messages are much more helpful than some of the error messages that we see in Excel, especially the ones invented 10, 20 years ago. All right, so no problem. I come back to Advanced Editor, and sure enough, I forgot to put a comma right there, a comma right there. There's our convention all the way down. Last one doesn't have a comma. Click Done. And there is the number. Home, close and load, loads it there, and boom, there it is. Now if I come over here and type quad and enter, right click, refresh, that is pretty amazing. So that's Power Query. Now we want to go over and do Power Pivot DAX. We're actually going to build a DAX formula that will run an OR logical test on two columns. Now, we already have these three tables in our data model, and I'm going to show you two ways. I have Power Pivot, so I can go to Power Pivot Manage Data Model, which lets me look, or Data, and there's a Manage Data Model. And actually, the keyboard, since Data Model is DM and data is A, the keyboard to open up the data model is Alt-A, DM. Now we can see we have our three tables here. If we were going to build a relationship, we could go over to Diagram View. We don't need either one of these. These are the three tables. There's our primary key, unique identifier. I can click and drag over to the column in F sales. That's our foreign key. And that would create a 1, that means primary key, to many, that's the fact table. Now I'm going to delete this because I promised you I'd show you how to do this if you don't have the proper version. I'm going to say delete, and delete from model. Close this. Now I have to do this all the time because I work at home and I don't have the right version at home. So we use Power Query to get them into the data model. You can also use the Create Pivot Table dialog box to sneak a table into the data model if you don't have the right version. But now that we have them there, how do we create a relationship? Well, for some reason, on the Data tab, they always have the relationship button here. If you don't have the right version, that button for data model is not there. So I'm going to click relationship. Now, this way is a little bit more difficult than the actual drag and drop we saw over in the Manage Data Model window. But I'm going to click New. And as long as we know foreign key and primary key, this is always going to be the lookup table. So I'm going to select from the data model. Notice we have the same tables down here. They say D product, and then the primary key, our lookup column in essence will be Pro key. Now we can go up to F sales from the data model, and it will pick it out automatically. Click OK. Now we have our relationship. click close. Now that's important because our DAX formula can actually see the relationship between two tables. So in our formula, we will be able to reference the color column. Now we actually don't have to create a relationship for this. And notice I called it dis parameters because it's a disconnected table. There is no relationship. Now, how in the world are we going to build our DAX formula if we don't have the Power Pivot ribbon tab? I'm going to build a pivot table. So right in this cell, insert pivot table or Alt-NV. And look at that. By default, it sees that there's something in the data model. If it selected one of these other ones, then just select Use the Workbook's Data Model. By the way, this is a dialog box. If you have an actual table that's up here, you can just click this, and it will dump it into the data model, even if you don't have the right version. So I'm going to dump my pivot table right in that cell. Click OK. Scroll over. I don't need workbook queries anymore. Now, one thing that's important is the dark field names at the top for that table, this table, and our disconnected parameters. That means it's in the data model. The ones without the dark bar at the top or the dark field names means it's not in the data model. So I'm going to expand F sales, and it lists the fields. Now, what we would like is a formula called a measure. It will appear in our field list, and we'll be able to drag and drop down to values. Now, this is kind of strange. Normally, we drag criteria down to the rows, column, filter, or slicer, and then drag pivot table calculations, or in our case, DAX formulas from the Power Pivot engine down to values. But we're just going to create our formula, drag it down here to calculate the one single answer. Now, how do we do that if we don't have the proper version? We come to the table name and right-click. Look at that, Add Measure. Now, here's our Create Formula dialog box called Measure. And measures are formulas that you drag and drop into pivot table values, and they'll actually see the criteria from the row, column, slicer, filter area. Now, the measure name, I'm going to call it Total Tab, and we're going to give it a description. And I called a DAX formula to run OR logical test across the relationship between D product and F sales table. Now we're going to come down here, and the function we're going to use is calculate. Now, calculate's the only function that allows us to change the criteria that comes from the pivot table. Now, in DAX language and Power Pivot language, all the criteria in the pivot table is called the filter context. All right, we need an expression that's the initial aggregate calculation. And then for us, we're going to add a filter for our OR logical test. I'm going to type SUM. Sum is an aggregate function that will calculate the total. And we're going to initially add F sales, sales column, close parentheses. Now, the beauty of calculate is that we can add in our formula a filter. And if we add any criteria in the pivot table, it will flow in. And together, this filter and the pivot table criteria will filter the underlying table and calculate the correct sum. Now, comma, the filter, we're actually going to use the smartly named function filter. Now, we need to give it a table. Now, check this out. We're actually trying to add from the F sales. But what I want to do is filter, and we can see our table here. We want to filter on product and color in the actual lookup table. Well, of course, the DAX formulas will take that filter from this product table. It will flow across the relationship, hit the F sales table, and boom, we'll get the correct answer. So the table, DP tab, D product, comma. And our filter expression, we need an OR logical test. So OR function, this one in DAX looks just like over in Excel. Our first logical test will be DP, and I'm going to down arrow to product. The convention always in DAX is that when you're referring to a column, you have the table name and the field name in square brackets. And then I'm going to ask the question of the product column, are you equal to? And we're going to hard code it in here first. There's our first logical test, comma. and then DP down arrow to color. Are you equal to, in double quotes, blue? That's hard-coded, but we'll change it later. Now, there's the screen tip. I love it. Close parentheses. And just like Excel, by the way, if I move this over here, there's filter expression. Watch what happens. Close parentheses. It's jumping back over there. I wish it would stay. Now we have filter inside of calculate. That whole filter will filter the D product, flow into sales, and we will get our correct answer. Close parentheses. One of the many amazing things about DAX is, look at this. I'm allowed to add number formatting to my formula. And anytime I use the formula in any pivot table, the number formatting will be there. I'm going to increase currency to 2, click OK. And now expand the table, and there it is. F of X icon means that is a DAX formula, a measure we can click and drag down to values. That is amazing. And now look at our answer. It is not matching the criteria here. And of course, that's correct because we hard-coded the values. If we change this, it would just always remain blue or quad. Now I want to edit this. I'm going to come over, and we don't have the right version, right? But we can totally edit our measure. Right-click the measure, and there it is, Edit Measure. Now what we want to do, and I'm going to expand the bottom here, is instead of hard-coding this in, we can use the values with an S function. You can read the description here. It will create a distinct, unique list of values. Now we're not really going to create a whole list of values. We're going to use the disconnected product column, and guess what? It only has one value, tab, close parentheses. Now, the nice thing about values is if it returns multiple items, it'll return a table to the formula. Or in our case, if it returns a single item, it'll return a single item that the formula can use as criteria. All right, we're going to highlight blue, and we're going to do the same thing. Values, tab, DIS, down arrow to color, tab, close parentheses. The values functions here will get the values and deliver them to our OR logical tests. That will tell filter how to filter that product table. The filtered product table will flow across to F sales, and the correct set of numbers will be used by the sum function. Now I'm going to click OK, and there it is. If I come over here and change this to quad and enter. Now I'm going to use the keyboard. Instead of going to data, refresh all, I'm going to use the keyboard for refresh all, Control Alt F5. And look at that, totally working. Now, one of many amazing things about the DAX formula is I can come over and start dragging and dropping criteria, and that formula will see that criteria and adjust the calculation. Now, let's learn something else interesting about Excel 2016 and the data model. Now, most of the time, if we have a date column, we don't want to use the automatic grouping feature that will add helper columns to F sales. Normally, we want to add a date table, especially if we're doing special time calculations in Power Pivot or we have big data. But if you have a small data set, watch this. I can simply drag date down to rows. And remember, those are daily dates. And instantly, it starts doing something. And if we go look at our table, it added a bunch of calculated columns. Those are helper columns in the data model. So on our F sales table, those were automatically created. Now, we don't need them. All I want is year, so I'm going to drag this off. And you got to be kidding me. Look at that. The formula totally updated. Now, if I come over here and type sunset and enter, Control Alt F5, everything updates. Now, row labels, I don't want to leave it like that. Report layout, show in tabular, and there we go. Wow, that was an epic video. We saw how to create a DAX formula using values or filter and calculate. We saw how to use Power Query to merge these two tables and connect the OR logical test to this table in our Excel sheet. Back on the sum no helper, we saw this amazing array formula. Over on sum helper, we saw two formulas, one with 3 SUMIFS and the other DSUM if we had a proper data set. And then we started it off with a logical true-false formula and conditional formatting using OR and VLOOKUP. All right, that was a lot of fun with OR logical tests. We'll see you next video.